call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 132 of the House Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. Of course, today we have all of our witnesses are on Zoom and we have some members on Zoom. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on Thursday, February 8, the committee is resuming its study of the Fisheries Act review. Welcome to our witnesses on our first panel. We have from Oceans North, Susanna Fuller, Vice President, Conservation and Projects, and no stranger to this committee. And from M Expertise Marine Incorporated, we have Lynn Morissette, Doctor of Marine Ecology, Fisheries and Marine Mammal Specialist, and Richard Williams, Fisheries Consultant. Thank you for taking the time to appear. You will each have up to 5 minutes or less for your opening statement. Mr. Fuller, you have the floor. Miss Fuller, you have the floor.
Is she frozen?
Miss Fuller?
Yeah.
She's frozen. Okay, I'll go to
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Williams. I'll go to you first. 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much for the invitation to appear today. Over my almost 50 years of fisheries research and consulting work, I have been privileged to support the development of what is arguably the best managed, most economically robust, and sustainable coastal fishery in the world. Not perfect by any means, but still a huge strategic asset for the rural coastal regions of Canada. This current review of the Act offers an opportunity to further advance sustainable development in the fisheries by addressing strategic issues and gaps where stronger legislative and regulatory governance is needed. In my view, the most significant failure in current fisheries legislation, regulations, and licensing policy is the great disparity in support for coastal communities and working fish harvesters between the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. In the Canada Gazette in 2020, the DFO minister articulated the government's rationale for new licensing regulations for Atlantic fisheries. I quote, "Progressive fisheries policies that prevent vertical integration between the fishing and processing sectors and that prevent the concentration of licenses in the hands of a few corporations or individuals have been pivotal in the maintenance of the wealth distribution across the Atlantic region and small communities. Without these policies, wealth from fishing licenses would be concentrated in the hands of ineligible third parties, resulting in fewer or lower-paying fishing jobs available in rural coastal areas, and a decrease of economic benefits being maintained in the coastal communities." Unquote. These are the words of the minister. This sets out in clear, concrete language why the Atlantic owner-operator policies were put into law. Importantly, it also describes in detail the negative outcomes we are actually seeing in British Columbia in the absence of fleet separation and owner-operator protections. That is, quote, "the concentration of licenses in the hands of a few corporations or individuals," unquote, and fewer or lower-paying fishing jobs available in rural coastal areas and a decrease of economic benefits being maintained in the coastal communities, unquote. StatCan's tax filer data confirms the poor performance of the British Columbia fishery. From 2010 to 2019, average income from fishing employment, captains and crew, on the Atlantic coast improved by 68%, while BC harvesters saw only 4% growth in earnings, even though total landed value in BC grew by 36% over the period. The wealth didn't go to the fishermen. More up-to-date DFO's licensing stats show that from 2014 to 2023, the fisheries labor force in British Columbia shrank by 1/3, a loss of 1,954 jobs, while harvester employment in Atlantic fisheries actually upticked slightly. There have been 800 fishing jobs lost in BC just since this committee's Sharing Risks and Benefits report was completed in 2019. Two major FOPO studies in 2019 and 23 examined these issues in great depth and called on the DFO minister to initiate transition to a made-in-BC owner-operator licensing regime. To date, however, only limited steps have been taken. DFO Pacific Region is currently conducting yet another engagement process to consult not on how to fix the licensing system, but on whether a fix is needed and what it might possibly look like. I therefore urge the committee to recommend the amendment of the Fisheries Act to establish fleet separation as the default licensing policy for all owner-operated coastal or small boat commercial fishing fleets in Canada, the template being the fleet separation rules currently in effect in designated Atlantic fisheries. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you for that. We'll now try Ms. Fuller again for 5 minutes or less, please. Ms. Fuller?
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. And I want to recognize the importance of this 5-year review of the Fisheries Act, the first one ever. The 2019 modernization of the Act marked the first major overhaul of the Fisheries Act since 1868, and it's one of the most important laws in Canada, both for our environment and our communities. It's an act that we should be proud of, and we should continue to implement to its fullest extent possible. If we do that, the Act will ensure that Canadians benefit from the future of our freshwater and marine ecosystems, which sustain culture, livelihoods, and economies for so many Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Two of the major upgrades to the Act in 2019 were the inclusion of Section 35 of the Constitution, and as Dr. Williams references, the owner-operator policy in Atlantic Canada, enshrining that into law. Oceans North staff are active participant in many fisheries advisory committees over the last 5 years, and we also support Canada and its representation on international fisheries bodies such as NAFO and ICAT. We work collaboratively whenever possible with the fishing industry, both the owner-operator and the offshore fleets. I want to touch base on 3 major aspects of the Act, and I hope you will consider in your review. The first 2 are areas where implementation is happening or is needed. Rebuilding of depleted fish populations and proactive protection of fish habitat. And the third includes a recommendation for a surgical change to the Act to ensure that fisheries decision-making includes climate change and biodiversity as factors to be considered. On fish stock rebuilding, with the addition of Section 6 of the Act in 2019, Canada joined other developed fishing nations in legally requiring depleted fish stocks to be restored. While there may be different perspectives in terms of timelines and measures to reach rebuilding, I think we can all agree that the most important factor in economically sustainable fisheries is having healthy fish populations. Without any fish, we will have no fisheries. As of November 2024, Canada has largely met the requirements of this section of the Act, with the majority of rebuilding plans are completed, although not all are public. Now we must adhere to these plans and ensure that they yield the results we need. Oceans North has conducted economic studies with a focus on forage fish like mackerel and herring that demonstrate how valuable these fish and fisheries can be to our economy and to the marine ecosystem if we take the time to allow these populations to rebuild. It will require patience, adherence to scientific advice, and consideration of future generations who deserve an opportunity to fish. Pending the approval of the next major batch of fish stocks, currently in Canada Gazette 1, rebuilding provisions will apply to 95 stocks in Canada. This means we have safeguards in place for when stocks decline. I know you've all been hearing and speaking a lot about northern cod, and as one of the greatest global population declines of all time, we have a particular responsibility to get rebuilding right and not just rebuild above the critical zone, but achieve healthy stocks. The second area I want to bring to your attention is the aspect of the Act that is yet to be implemented. In 2012, amendments to the Fisheries Act allowed for proactive protection of fish habitat through the establishment of ecologically significant areas. This was maintained in the 2019 Act. So under Section 35(2) of the Act, Canada ESAs can be established by the minister. Canada has over 2 million lakes and rivers that support Indigenous food fisheries, recreational activities, and provide water sources for many of our communities. Despite the ability to designate ecologically significant areas and ensure prohibitions to activities other than fishing that would negatively impact such habitat, to date, Canada has not made use of the powers of this Act. In October 2024, the St. Mary's River in Nova Scotia was announced as the first candidate ESA in the country. That's the first of over 2 million bodies of water. Not that we're expecting all of these to be fully protected, but we do think we need to make progress. We can and must do better in developing an effective and efficient regulatory process that allows us to protect more fish habitat. Finally, our marine and coastal ecosystems are changing. The Gulf of St. Lawrence on the east coast is 9 degrees above the long-term average. Mahi-mahi are being seen off Newfoundland. Whales are shifting their migration habits. Lobster catches in southwest Nova Scotia, one of Canada's most valuable fisheries, are declining as lobster move north in search of colder water. All of this is due to the 90% of excess heat that our oceans absorb as a result of global warming. Fisheries will and are changing as a result of climate change, so climate change must be incorporated as one of the factors to be considered in decisions. This can be done by amending Section 2.5 to include climate change, which will ensure that ecosystem-based management, to which Canada committed in 2004, includes addressing climate and is fully implemented, as this is also a key aspect of the recently released 2030 Nature Strategy, which commits us to sustainable fisheries under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Changing ecosystems will change our fishing communities, and planning ahead will reduce the impact of those changes over time. Working with the fishing industry and Indigenous communities on ecosystem-based management can meet both the needs of the ecosystem and incorporate on-the-water knowledge to ensure future fisheries. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective, and I look forward to questions at the right time.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Lynn Morissette for her opening statement of 5 minutes or less.
Bonjour à tous. Merci de cette
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. My name is Lynn Morissette, and I'm the President and CEO of M Expertise Marine. I thank you for the opportunity to share my experience as a fisheries specialist, advocate of integrated approaches, and environmental mediator. Canada, with its 3 oceans and diverse ecosystems, holds a unique natural wealth. Yet our management of these resources remains bound by outdated approaches. The Fisheries Act, despite its 2019 update, exemplifies this lag with its lack of concrete implementation and interdisciplinary vision. The first issue I'd like to raise is the lack of interdisciplinarity in our departments. Interdisciplinarity has become a cornerstone in academic settings. Researchers collaborate across disciplines to tackle complex and interconnected challenges, whether in resource management or climate change. This approach, widely recognized as vital for innovative solutions, is also gaining traction in some federal departments. But at Fisheries and Oceans Canada, let's say it remains a concept waiting to be embraced. DFO often operates in silos with fragmented, discipline-specific approaches that struggle to integrate external knowledge. Interdisciplinarity could greatly enrich policymaking and fisheries management, but it is largely absent from departmental practices. The result? Decisions are made without fully leveraging the wealth of external expertise, be it scientific, community-based, or traditional Indigenous knowledge. This is not to say that DFO staff lack competence or commitment. However, it is hard to ignore a certain implicit attitude in their internal processes, a belief that their science, framed within the Fisheries Act, holds a higher status than others, whether from academics or fishers. Consultations, when they include external experts or stakeholders, often feel more like a validation exercise than genuine dialogue. And as for fishers, whose expertise is forged by a lifetime at sea, their knowledge is often dismissed as anecdotal, if not outright ignored. This posture is not only counterproductive, it is a barrier to progress. Managing fisheries and marine ecosystems requires an open, interdisciplinary approach. Continuing to act as though ecosystems, disciplines, or worse, knowledge itself can be compartmentalized is a mistake. To build modern and effective management, it is time for DFO to step out of its ivory tower and join the collaborative table. In order to collaborate, another major issue is trust, which depends as much on just measures as it does on honest relationships. According to Statistics Canada, as of 2023, less than 30% of Canadians believe that the government was effectively protecting the marine environment. This erosion of trust is fueled by errors in implementing measures. Take a recent example from 2024. Fishers in the Maritimes refused to remove their traps from a closed zone intended to protect a North Atlantic right whale. Why? Because the decision, poorly communicated, was based on an incorrect boundary definition. On-site fishers found that the whale was not even in the designated area. Such arbitrary decisions undermine government credibility and weaken conservation efforts. Studies such as those by the FAO demonstrate that integrating local knowledge not only improves policies but also strengthens community buy-in. And yet, too often, fishers and Indigenous communities are invited as token participants, not active partners. This must change if sustainable management is to be achieved. What I have seen in all of the documents I've seen is that there's an urgent need for collaboration and mediation. Finally, it is time to embed mediation into the Fisheries Act. Canada, with its diverse stakeholders and interconnected ecosystems, cannot afford sterile conflicts. Other jurisdictions show that this is achievable. Quebec's Environmental Quality Act and New Zealand's Resource Management Act both include mediation mechanisms to diffuse tensions. These tools foster collaboration, reduce conflict, and rebuild trust. Mediation should not be seen as an option, but as a prerequisite to any formal dispute. Our act could be more than a piece of legislation. It could be a way of establishing regional committees. I should say that the Fisheries Act, again, is more than a piece of legislation. It should embody an ambitious vision to protect ecosystems while respecting the communities that depend on them. Today, that vision feels out of reach. But by incorporating tools like mediation, fostering interdisciplinarity, and valuing local knowledge, we have the opportunity to transform this act into a model of sustainable and collaborative management. Thank you for your attention. I'm available to answer your questions now.
With our first round of questioning, we'll start off with Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing today. My question is to Ms. Fuller. Ms. Fuller, your organization has celebrated the closing of the mackerel fishery in Atlantic Canada. How's closing the mackerel fishery in Atlantic Canada and being such a success story for yourself, how's that helped you in your international fundraising endeavors with groups like Pew's Foundation?
I'm not sure that it's relevant to any fundraising. I don't think it was a celebration at all. I think it was a recognition that after years of declining catches and science advice, that in order to rebuild the mackerel fishery in line with the Fisheries Act and the requirements, and we worked very closely with the fishing industry on this as well as First Nations. We know it's a very difficult decision, but it's not for fundraising.
No, okay, thank you.
To rebuild fish for Canadians.
Thank you very much. My time is short. You mentioned that you want to incorporate on-the-water knowledge. How much of the $13 million that you had in your spend last year in your financial report between staff and projects, how much of that $13 million was spent in your on-the-water observations of mackerel from Maine to Hopedale? And you mentioned the 9-degree warming of waters. And obviously, you expect that the range migration pattern of species has changed. How much of your budget do you spend to try to figure out why there's such a disconnect between on-the-water observations by fish harvesters and the stock assessments by DFO?
Well, we don't do our own science on mackerel. However, about 50% of our budget goes back out to communities to conduct research and science and work that they feel is important. And so happy to collaborate on any research that is brought to us by the fishing associations. But I think we follow DFO science, which is really what most fisheries industries rely upon. And that is why we are advocating for more discussion to be had that it does include harvesters' knowledge. A lot of discussion happens at the advisory committees, as you know.
Thank you. So you follow DFO science. Last year and over the last number of years, DFO science has stated that it was safe for the capelin stock to have the very tiny capelin fishery that exists, about 25,000 tons in all of Atlantic Canada. But at the same time, seals in Atlantic Canada are said to consume 1 million tons of capelin. And you spoke about your interest in biodiversity. What efforts have you made to help the fishing industry and the sealing industry develop markets to be able to have an ethically sourced seal harvest to aid in the restoring of biodiversity?
We've had, as you know, we've attended the Seal Advisory Committee meetings. I think you have had discussions with my colleague John Couture on this. I think you know that we are supportive of any fisheries that are ecosystem-based and healthy. It's not our goal, or it's not our role to sell fish, but we are certainly not against a sustainable seal harvest, and we understand some of the barriers to those markets. Some of those are the U.S. Marine Mammal Protection Act, as you know, and we are not able to change laws in other countries.
So, you just mentioned assessments, and your participation in stock assessments. And we know that stock assessments are a key component of the Fisheries Act. Why are stakeholders so upset? What I mean by stakeholders is fish harvesters and fish processors, so upset that you received stakeholder status versus remaining as observers. In a situation like happened in Gander last year during the stock assessment. What happened during in the capelin stock assessment in Gander last winter?
Yeah, Mr. Small, we've been part of fisheries advisory committees for the better part of a decade and been very welcomed by the fishing industry, have lots of shared goals in common. I think what happened at that particular meeting was that the terms of reference had not been sent out to everybody. It was a very unfortunate situation where our staff person actually had to be protected by conservation and protection officers because of the reaction. However, we have had good discussions with fish, food, and allied workers since then and better understood their concerns and essentially received an apology for that behavior. And I don't think that will be the case going forward. I think that we have good relationships, and I grew up in a coastal community. I, have sympathy for inshore fishermen. I think the best thing is to be around the table so that you can come to common understanding.
So given the fact that Labrador is seeing mackerel on the coast for the first time in history, as far north as Hopedale, and it's all around the island of Newfoundland and Labrador, right on down the northern Gulf to the southern Gulf. There was mackerel in Nova Scotia this summer, right on down to Maine. I consulted heavily with stakeholders. How about if mackerel's returned? Look at what you've done to the fishing industry stakeholders that depend on mackerel. What are you doing to prove any recovery in mackerel? Do you believe there's any recovery in mackerel?
I think we hope that there will be. I think we hope there will be. And, we don't do stock assessments, but we're happy to talk with you further about what decisions in the future could be made when the stock recovers.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Madame Morissette.
Thank you. Dr. Morissette, my questions are mainly for you. I heard you earlier mention the whale story that I saw unfold in my riding, and you pointed out that there were very questionable decisions made, and the cooperation with fishers is so important. We need to talk to them and take into consideration what they have to say. We had a crisis in the fishery in terms of what happened last year. So having said that, you talked about management earlier, that there's a lack of interdisciplinarity between the DFO and other stakeholders. I think that you consider, well, you're a scientist, and do you feel that scientists within DFO, when you're in meetings with them and when you share opinions that you might have on a given subject in the fisheries, on the resources, etc., do you feel that they're listening to you? Not just listened to, but taken seriously? Do you sense that what you're saying is taken into consideration, or that it's just in one ear and out the other? Look, Mr. Cornier, I did a doctorate in British Columbia in fisheries sciences, and I consider myself as a scientist and researcher. Unfortunately, in some meetings with DFO, I don't have the impression that I'm taken seriously. I have the impression that I'm there like some kind of decoration because I'm not part of the elite of government scientists. Now, is that the same sense that your colleagues have, not those who work for DFO, but other scientists that you know? Do you think they feel the same way in the face of DFO scientists? Well, within the non-governmental academia, they esteem me more than the people at DFO do. Well, if we sum up what your other colleagues have said, if your colleagues feel like they're not being listened to or taken seriously, well, yes, for the most part, it's not always that way, but most of the time that's how we feel. And I don't want to speak for my other colleagues, for other academics, but it's an impression that seems to be quite present in the scientific community in general for academics versus the government scientists. So in the new version of the Fisheries Act that's coming, you're participating now in this meeting, but you will certainly make recommendations that we should include or perhaps even take out of the Act. I want to come back to the management of whales, because in the Fisheries Act there's a lot of talk about protecting the habitat, but we almost never talk about protecting our communities when we talk about that resource. And I think it should be. When we talk about protecting whales, for example, and I'd like to have an answer that is just clear, that's not on the fence. We've had measures in place for years to protect whales, and we keep repeating it. You appeared before the committee and proposed some solutions. Can we relax those measures somewhat for protecting whales without hurting the whales, without hurting the markets, and while protecting our communities? Is it possible to do that? Well, the short answer is yes, because there are more and more technologies and management opportunities that have been tested and shown. We've been testing out solutions for 6 years now, so there are things we can do to improve coexistence between fishers, First Nations communities, and protecting species at risk. It's not easy, but it's doable. We have concrete solutions, tangible solutions that we've tested in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence that prove that it's possible to do so. Therefore, Ms. Morissette, what's missing in the Fisheries Act currently? Looking at everything that we've talked about, it's hard to have the great discussion in 6 minutes, but what's lacking in the Fisheries Act to ensure that everyone is involved, that all the concerns of each stakeholder is taken into account? Because you said earlier it's important to bring the fishers to the table, but you know as well as I do, Dr. Morissette, and you participated in a panel that happened in my riding, some fishers or fishermen say that for shrimp there's plenty, but unfortunately there's a decrease for mackerel and other species. So how can we have a good portrait of what's happening? My father was a fisherman all his life. There was always fish for him in the water. But how are we going to be able to have good cooperation from all of these parties? What should we do as a government in order to find a win-win situation and a good version of the Fisheries Act? Well, there has to be trust, and that's why with the several meetings you invited me to, I talk about environmental mediation. This is a process that is official, that has standards, that has been proven. I think it would be a really good tool for fisheries management.
Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being present. I know, Dr. Morissette, that you're very busy, so we're very pleased to have you here today. Tell me, you spoke a lot, and I heard you in a previous meeting talk a lot about mediation. Can you explain to us quickly how we can integrate this into a Fisheries Act? How can we more specifically define this concept of mediation that might be a solution to many problems and rebuild trust between people on the front lines and the department? Well, mediation is a recipe. It's an approach with stages and steps that is intended to find solutions or compromises concerning a conflict or something where the people around the table don't all have the same ideas. It's a method that's been proven in all kinds of domains. Often we talk about family mediation or workplace mediation. So we have huge issues in the fisheries, and we also have species that are at risk, things that are disappearing. So we don't have the luxury of ignoring anybody's knowledge. In order to be able to improve and to take advantage to the maximum of what we have, these people have to be able to talk to each other. They have to be able to, and to be able to do that, you have to have trust. So these are all things that need to be rebuilt. People aren't talking to each other. We're working in silos, and trust is really undermined. And so it starts there. But the good news is that mediation, environmental mediation, is really a recipe that's very structured and that we can easily integrate into legislation. There are several acts in other jurisdictions that support that approach. It should be part of the process. If there are court cases or cases that aren't moving fast enough, New Zealand has been very innovative in innovation on the environmental front, and I think we can do the same thing here. We have 3 oceans. We have a wealth of knowledge that's very diverse, and we absolutely have to be able to integrate as much as we can, as much of that knowledge as we can, so that we get the most effective solutions possible. Because it's a race against time. The issues we're facing, we can't wait and find a solution 15 years down the road. Things have to be decided now. And the more we work in collaboration, the more our solutions will be quick. Tell me, if we're setting up mediation, does this mediation, in your opinion, would it take precedence over the political will of some parties to perhaps take quick decisions just to make people happy? Can we confront the people who've lost trust in us by assuring them that mediation would be more important than politics, and with interdisciplinarity, I'm thinking, for example, of sociologists. There's a whole cultural aspect, I think, in the fisheries. I think of the Magdalen Islands, their tourism, their family life, everything involves the fishery. So how can we ensure that everyone is happy within an act that we can put this forward and avoid unfortunate political acts, let's say? Well, the first thing that we do when we begin a mediation is to put the parties together. It can be 2, it could be 3, and get them to understand that they're all on an equal footing with their various agendas and priorities. but nobody is more important than anyone else. So in order for a mediation to function, to work, you really have to work in collaboration, but horizontally, and it's not hierarchical. So that's the very first thing to do. I think that it's a big challenge. We've never worked this way in our governments normally. The mediator or the government takes what they want from coastal communities. So when it's the government versus a small fisherman on a coastal village, it's hard for some people to see things in a horizontal way and not see the hierarchy. So the first thing we have to do is to rethink our relationships and what we have in our ecosystems. We have to break down those silos and the pyramids and all work on the same level. So when we work in mediation, it's 1/3 independent and the stakeholders are on the same level. So nobody's depending on anybody else. Nope. It's so interesting. Thank you. In conclusion, I'd like to hear you speak about the whole component of specialists in sociology. Of course, there are measures that can be taken, but there are people who are specialists in the enforcement of legislation within society and the repercussions that this has on a whole coastal community. So is that something that you've thought about to integrate in this mediation? Well, yes. But that's another silo that has to be torn down because the fisheries issues and the right whale one is a complex one. It's a species at risk, and we're managing that with fisheries laws that deal with crab and lobster at the same time. So at the same time, there are social issues and there are economic issues. So the interdisciplinarity and academics have learned to work this way. It's so much faster, it's so much more effective when we can see a problem from different perspectives. It works. And there are oceanographers that are working with artists. And so these perspectives are interesting and important, and they're helpful. But once again, the silos have to be broken down, and people have to work together. Thank you.
For 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the witnesses who are here today. My first questions are going to be to you, through the Chair, to you, Mr. Williams. At the end of your opening statement, you had talked a little bit about the DFO Pacific region going through another engagement process. I'm wondering if you can share just high level what's going on there. I know that we had an engagement process that happened since my time in this position, that there were many problems that occurred. The questions were were problematic. It went to people that it perhaps shouldn't have gone to and didn't go to people that it should have gone to. And now I'm hearing that it's going through another engagement process around whether it needs to be fixed. So this is highly concerning to me. Can you share a little bit around what's happening and could you just share more information? Thank you.
Sure. The region launched in the summer its engagement process. It's called their modernization process. And it has 5, I think, agenda items on it, including kind of transparency around ownership data and foreign ownership. And sort of number 5 on the list is licensing policy, without any specific or concrete mention of what the issue to be addressed in relation to licensing policy is. I would say that the people conducting the engagement process seem to be making a very, very concerted and genuine effort to reach people who are often not involved in these kinds of processes. They're not just going to the standard advisory committees and to the major stakeholders, but making a real effort at the community level and various industry sectors. So I think that part is positive. But the part that is a bit disturbing to those of us who've been involved in this for some time is that, again, they kind of seem to be starting from square one. They seem to, not really have any kind of foundation in terms of the work that's already done, particularly by this extremely important work done by this committee, but also by the provincial government. The provincial government has come out very, very strongly endorsing development of an owner-operator licensing regime. That's built into the new coastal marine strategy that the BC government has announced. The Premier of BC has written to the Prime Minister saying it's time to transition to an owner-operator licensing model. The major alliance of coastal First Nations in British Columbia has endorsed the transition to an owner-operator licensing model. So it's very discouraging that this modernization engagement exercise doesn't seem to start from that place. It seems to go back to even before the first FOPO report and ask basic questions about what's going on in the fishery.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I was just looking through the list of recommendations that we put forward as a committee in 2023 and trying to find the exact recommendation here or where in the report it speaks to, but this seems to be in direct contradiction to what it is that we talked about as a committee and the recommendations that we put forward. So I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, and I think this is important for us to be reviewing and finding out how to best move forward. The other piece, Mr. Williams, and I'm need to be fairly quick on this. You talked about 800 fishing jobs being lost since 2019. Any quick insights as to why you think there's such a difference of treatment between the Pacific and Atlantic coasts here in Canada?
The major factor is that the majority of enterprises on the West Coast rely heavily on leasing of access rights in order to be able to continue their businesses. On the East Coast, the majority of small boat inshore enterprises have a lobster license or a snow crab license as the foundation for their enterprise, and that's almost a career for a captain and crew, and once they have that. And they're not so reliant from year to year on getting into different. In BC, there isn't that sort of foundational fish stock that you can build a business around, and so the industry there depends on access, and because of the ownership of licenses by non-fishing interests, that comes at a high price. 70 to 80% of landed value goes to pay leasing fees.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Fuller, I know that I've received and have been in correspondence with you around the deep seabed mining. In particular, I think that this is applicable to what we're talking about today. We know that we have a lack of clear information around the actual ecosystem that we have in our deep seabeds. We know that the seabed acts as a form of carbon, I can never pronounce this word, but basically capturing and storing carbon compounds from the environment. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit around why you feel it's essential that we see leadership being taken by Canada to protect our deep seabeds at a time when we're seeing the climate changing so rapidly as a result of the climate crisis.
I think, it's one of the few opportunities we have to make sure we understand the impacts of an industry before it starts. And I think we're increasingly understanding the role of the deep ocean in carbon sequestration. I also think we don't understand the impacts on our fisheries. We know that the plumes from test mining can go up to 1,000 kilometers away from that test mine. And I think, there's now 32 countries around the world who have said they don't want deep seabed mining until and unless we fully understand the impacts. Norway just yesterday or the day before actually decided not to go ahead with leasing. So it's an industry that we don't need right now. I think that we have lots of other technological solutions, and we're fairly pleased that Canada has said they will not establish regulations or a path forward on deep seabed mining. I think the other thing in Canada is that the resources that have been identified on the West Coast are now in a protected area, and we don't allow mining in our protected areas. So I think we need to solidify that position, particularly given what we're talking about here and the importance of the fishery to First Nations and to coastal communities. We really can't do anything to jeopardize that renewable resource for what is a non-renewable resource and is just not needed at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Williams, I'll start out with you if I could. You talked quite a bit about the owner-operator issue and what's in place in on the Atlantic coast and not necessarily on the Pacific coast. Are the legislative pieces and regulations to manage owner-operator issues in place on the East Coast?
Yes, they are, yes.
And are they being adequately enforced on the East Coast?
People in the industry, I think, would say no. They feel that there are still companies and other investors are getting away with various kinds of under-the-table ways of controlling licenses and so on. Particularly, I think in Newfoundland and Labrador, there are challenges. I think the emerging kind of reality is that with some of the demographic challenges and so on, a lot of harvesters are at retirement age. Licenses are changing hands, and it's not only companies that are finding ways to control, but you're also seeing rich fishermen kind of getting control, buying out and building up enterprises where multiple licenses are stacked within an enterprise, and there are ways of disguising that, and putting the license in somebody's name, et cetera. So there certainly are enforcement issues, but overall, the industry leaders in the harvesting sector that I'm in touch with strongly appreciate what has been done since the Fisheries Act, the new Fisheries Act, and the regulations, but are pushing for better enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Now, on the West Coast, what's taking place out there? You've already talked about how they're finally moving forward, but really it only seems they're looking at, are there changes needed when I think we've done, well, I know we've done 2 reports out of this committee that clearly said that changes need to be made. If you can just elaborate quickly on that one, and then I've got questions for someone else here. Thank you.
Well, you've got these converging forces in the BC fishery, the demographics, the aging out of the baby boomer generation, who are the majority of license holders, working fishermen, boat owners, and crew, and then economic conditions, because, as I mentioned, the leasing costs and so on that are so bad for working harvesters that the young people are not coming in or staying in the fishery. So I think a large part of that story about the loss in employment is about just simply you can't get people to work in the sector. And as more and more people age out, we're going to have a really serious crisis about who's going to catch the fish.
Well, thank you, because I think I can echo that. I was contacted by a prawn fisherman off the West Coast who this year he had to buy his quota at approximately $110,000 for a 34 or 38-day opening. Didn't know how much he was going to catch, but he had to invest that $110,000 just for the license, on top of having the vessel, the gear, the crew, the bait, everything else. So it seems to be a high time something was done on the West Coast. Ms. Fuller, I'll switch to you now. You mentioned that Oceans North, in response to one of the other questions this morning, you mentioned that Oceans North is not able to change laws in other countries. Who can?
That would be the government of other countries.
And would that be achieved through diplomatic work by Canadian officials to encourage other countries, or is it simply left up to other countries?
No, I mean, I think there's been lots. I mean, there's been lots of diplomacy with our closest trading partners, including the U.S. and European Union on seal harvest, for example. That was the issue this was raised. I think we recently see our Canadian government trying to make sure that tariffs don't go into place, right? I think other countries absolutely can have a role, particularly when it comes to trade. And when we're talking about fisheries, about 75% of our fisheries are exported. So absolutely. And I think, specific to seals, there's some work to be done there. There is some trade barriers from a legal perspective. There's also not a lot of markets. I think we face that with other fisheries such as redfish as well. So it's usually never just one obstacle in fisheries.
Could be a market if the diplomatic work was done. Is that correct?
Potentially. I mean, you look at redfish, they're too small, really, for the commercial market. So trying to figure that out is complicated. And seals have other issues in terms of markets. But for sure, more work can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. We'll now go to Mr. Kellaway for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello to the witnesses. Some good conversation today, and I want to hopefully get to the three of you in terms of your testimony, but also your focus on recommendations. And in particular, I'll start with Dr. Morissette. And knowing my time is limited, but you made a really good point in terms of focusing on science and the importance of having industry and Fisher's knowledge, science involved in the mix in terms of making decisions and trying to find that ecosystem. If you were to open the page of a forthcoming study that we complete and you look to the recommendations on that very topic, how would it read to you? What would you want to see?
Je pense que ce qu'il faudrait faire.
I think that what we'd have to do is really identify all of the people that have expertise and knowledge on the ground, not necessarily with an academic diploma, but that it be recognized. Indigenous knowledge, for example, and the fishermen's knowledge be recognized, and that scientists who do have expertise in different files in connection with ecosystem protection in line with the Fisheries Act be identified as experts at the same level. And from that point, well, depending on the issues involved, that the Fisheries Act will run up against and that it should have precedence over, we would have to consult those different stakeholders equally without looking at their diplomas or whatever labels they might have and the perception we might have of them in society.
To Mr. Williams, and I want to just drill down around the owner-operator model on the East Coast and the Atlantic. And in your testimony, you talked about the need for an owner-operator's fleet separation, which I totally agree with, and we need to land the plane on that. I'm looking for a better analogy related to fisheries, but we'll forego that.
Dock the boat.
Dock the boat. There you go. So when we're looking at the model on the East Coast, are you looking at a complete replication of that on the West Coast, or are there nuances that would need to be made in a British Columbia model?
Yeah, we've done a great deal of work on this over the last couple of years with industry people in the West Coast, and we've come to a kind of strategic approach that we think is very workable. When you look at the evolution of owner-operator licensing on the East Coast, there are two major steps in the process. The one is the introduction in 1979 of fleet separation, which was a decision made by the minister and imposed with minister's authority on the overall industry, dividing up all of the East Coast fisheries into inshore and offshore sectors, right? And everything that's happened since then in terms of owner-operator rules, who can fish the licenses, how different fleets are managed, whether they have stocking or leasing or all these things, was not done by minister through the FEDA. It was done by fishermen's organizations in advisory committees, et cetera. We see the same process in British Columbia. Change the whole structure of the industry by, same as on the East Coast, by bringing in fleet separation.
Right.
Under Section 9.1 in the Fisheries Act, the minister has the authority to do that. It's a ministerial order to say licensing will work. Use the PIFCAF process to allow a transitional period of time for that to take place through willing selling, willing buyer. It'll need support in terms of access to capital for fishermen and so on. But bring it, then let the owner-operator rules, the specific ways in which in each fleet, will you have stocking, will you have leasing, all these different things. And because BC is made up of almost entirely of multi-species enterprises, there probably will need to be much more flexible owner-operator rules and leasing systems and so on, but under a fair structure. The thing that fleet separation will do, it'll bring license prices down to being affordable by working fishermen, and it will put working fishermen enterprise owners at the table, being the people who control access to the resource, and therefore it's their responsibility to solve these problems, as happened on the East Coast.
Thank you for that. How much time?
Mr.
That is it? Okay.
2 seconds left.
2 seconds left. I yield the floor.
Scotian, you've been talking fast.
About that.
No, that's great. Great answers. Thank
So
you.
now we'll go to Madam Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Monsieur le Président, vous avez
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You manage time very well. I appreciate that. Ms. Morissette, or Dr. Morissette, I'll come back to you to talk about the human factor. I could give you a whole list of situations, obviously, just stressful situations that people have lived. A mackerel fisherman who's spent a fortune on trying to get set up before they announced the closure of that fishery. We've seen suicides in Chandler recently. With the steps or the process that we're discussing, should the human factor not be an important component of the exercise? That the whole idea of a greedy fisherman be just dispelled, and to talk about that man as a good human being? Well, I'll tell you that the Quebec Réseau Maritime funded an interesting study on interdisciplinarity. We did this in the Baie des Chaleurs with fishermen from the area. So there was a threefold approach: an ecological study of the situation in terms of the fishery and species at risk, a sociological study that showed that there isn't another generation coming up of fishermen because this job seems to be too much trouble, too risky financially, and that was very, very worrisome. We worked with a sociologist from Renault, who's a specialist in these kind of crisis situations. She worked in rebuilding the population at Lac Mégantic after that crisis, and she dealt with the crisis in the same way, which is to say that it's a terrible shock to the community. And we also did an economic and sustainable development component. So in order to have sustainable development, all of those other aspects have to be taken into account. When I talk about interdisciplinarity, it's integrating all of these different branches of science into our analysis and as we try to find a solution. Thank you so much, Dr. Morissette, for your generosity and your science and your openness. You are a very important and precious component of our study. Thank you.
Up the first hour of testimony and questioning. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to you, Mr. Williams, and I'm going to be quick on this. Just regarding the survey and the engagement process that we were talking about, I found the recommendation, and it's recommendation 3 in the 2023 recommendations that we put forward as a committee around owner-operator. And it says in here in recommendation 3 not only points out the flaws of the survey that was put forward, but it also talks about the timeline for a full transition to Canadian ownership should be 7 years or less. Can you clarify if you feel if we're on track to meet that recommendation that was put forward by this committee?
We're not on track at all because the decision hasn't been made to go in this direction. If you think about a PIF-CAF kind of process, where the minister makes an announcement that this will take place in terms of the control change in the ownership structure for access rights, that hasn't happened yet. So until that happens, then no, there isn't anything at the moment happening that taking us in the direction that the FOPO committee recommended.
Thank you. It's interesting that we heard from witnesses when we did this study that the only thing of the recommendations from 2019 that had really been acted on was a petition that was highly flawed. And now we're in a position that we are finding out that the petition's basically being redone. Anyways, I'm not going to use my whole time talking about this. I appreciate this information coming forward, and I hope that we can see some solutions to this problem as we move forward. My next question is to Ms. Fuller. Ms. Fuller, I don't have a lot of time. There was a letter sent to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans by yourself and other conservation and environmental NGOs from across the country that worked with the Liberal government for over 4 years to help modernize the Fisheries Act. And one of the recommendations that you talked about that was put into place was around the precautionary principle and an ecosystem approach in the consideration for decision making. And this is something I've brought up before with other witnesses. Can you clarify what needs to be done to more clearly identify how these precautionary principles are more consistently applied through the Act?
Yeah, I think the rebuilding process and the precautionary approach framework does help do that in terms of having scientific reference points. I think precaution, though, is fundamentally value judgment, and so we don't want to put it all on scientists all the time. And then from an ecosystem perspective, DFO is working on an ecosystem-based framework. It's overdue. It's been 20 years since we promised we would do ecosystem-based management. I think it is more and more urgent because we are understanding the links between predator-prey species. Also, I cannot underestimate the impacts of climate change. We're seeing shrimp disappear from the Scotian shelf. Snow crab is being impacted. So I do think that ecosystem approach work really needs to happen. It's good that it's in the decision-making part of the Act or the factors to be considered, but we need to get to some real-world outcomes and processes, and perhaps the process that Dr. Morissette is referencing can help us get to better ecosystem-based management if we're doing it collectively across stakeholders and rights holders.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. That concludes our first hour of testimony and questions. I want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Morissette, Ms. Fuller and Mr. Williams. We're going to suspend for a moment now as we switch out the panel. Our witnesses on our second panel. We have from the Association of Captains Owners of Gaspésie, Claudio Bernacci, Director General, and from the Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association, Mr. Robert Jenkins and Mr. Ian McPherson, Executive Director and President. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. Each organisation will have 5 minutes or less for their opening statement. Mr. Bernacci, you can start off for 5 minutes or less, please.
Kui, bonjour, hi.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For centuries, the marine environment of the St. Lawrence has provided access to diverse, high-quality food. The communities along its shore derive income from this source, which fuels a sizable economy in eastern Canada. However, on repeated occasions, we allowed the worst to happen when fish stocks reached such low levels that their survival was in question. Generation after generation, the same approach is perpetuated. And so I wonder how we could have allowed this to happen in the first place, then let it happen over and over again. Occasionally, individuals rise up to sound the alarm, then sit back down, lost in the crowd. Meanwhile, some are getting richer, others are going bankrupt, communities are deserting each other, or individuals are seeking re-election. Everyone has their own agenda, their own interests, all too often to the detriment or one of the other of the biomasses that make up the St. Lawrence. Doomed to the same results of the same reports of failures, we're following the path, that of fishing, processing, and volume marketing. Yet the signs are clear and unequivocal. We need a Fisheries Act in Canada that is enforceable, that is accompanied by the means to enforce it. We need it in order to preserve the economy of many coastal communities that depend on it in whole or in part, to continue the integration of our Indigenous communities in this industry. We also need to have objective, non-partisan discussions that ignore the interests of one side or the other, based on the best information available, whether it comes from our scientists, from other resources around the world, or from our main fishermen's associations, which have the knowledge and expertise of their members and can contribute to an even greater knowledge of the reality on the ground. I would therefore ask you to consider the possibility of using fishermen to acquire scientific data and thus encourage cooperation. By doing so, we will facilitate the development and integration of a genuine ecosystem approach, which should in turn enable integrated fisheries management to be adopted by DFO and the industry, including Aboriginal communities. The better we understand the fishing environment and the different factors that define it, the better placed we will be to give the industry the predictability it needs to make it more resilient. This industry needs flexibility, firstly from DFO to allow sustainable exploitation of species, including emerging species, from fishermen by being open to moving away from volume fishing to quality fishing, from processors by being constantly on the lookout for new markets, both large and small, and sometimes niche, and finally on the part of the provincial authorities to support the initiative of all the players in the supply chain. This industry also needs competent people to make important decisions about the future of the fishery and the sustainability of the resource. In my short experience over the last 4 years, I have seen 3 ministers at the head of DFO come and go. I don't believe that any of these people have had the time to develop the knowledge and expertise required to make sufficiently informed decisions on the most important issues. I wonder sometimes if it would be better to be able to count on a pan-Canadian body free of partisanship, whose members would be regularly renewed and whose complementary expertise would enable appropriate decision-making in compliance with a renewed Fisheries Act. I invite you to reflect on the possibility of reviewing DFO's senior governance as proposed above, in particular by giving them opportunities to get closer to the community in order to better understand the issues. The doors of the ACPG and Rivière-au-Renard are open to them. Fortunately, in the midst of all these challenges, there are people who want to see fisheries evolve into something different, to give it all the flexibility it needs to adapt to the changes that are being imposed on it. They can be found in the industry, at DFO, in other federal or provincial departments, and even in the general public. All the necessary foundations are in place for the developing multi-stakeholder collaboration to take things further together. There are many issues in Canadian waters, and different groups are trying to tackle them. Fishers can contribute to the search for solutions and even to the effort to ensure that Canada's sovereignty over and in its waters is respected. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. McPherson for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association would like to thank the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans for the opportunity to provide input on potential changes to the Fisheries Act of Canada. This important document is vital in keeping our ocean resources viable for current and future generations. Today, Captain Jenkins and I, on behalf of our 1,260 captains, will present what we feel are important, critical, and relevant changes that will assist in keeping our ocean resources healthy and sustainable. The current fisheries regulatory regime is extensive and complicated. However, above all, it is important that the resource wins while contributing to the continued existence and vibrancy of coastal communities. Today, we would like to highlight the following high-level points. We are very receptive to expanding on these points in the question and answer period that follows today's opening remarks. This list is meant to be comprehensive, but by no means is complete. With meaningful harvester discussion and pragmatic approaches, workable solutions can be obtained. In addition, any regulatory changes need to be supported with effective and practical regulations that will reinforce these initiatives. We support the following initiatives. Number one, the resource must come first. Number two, one license in, one license out approach to maintain equilibrium in terms of not adding additional effort in the fishery. Number three, boots on the boat, direct operational involvement of owner-operators and First Nation vessels that are crewed by band members. This keeps the financial proceeds from fishing in our local communities. Number four, same seasons for all harvesters. Same seasons has a direct correlation with the protection of the resource and that the resource coming first. Number five, consistent and transparent enforcement of the Fisheries Act for all harvesters. Number six, all harvesters to be part of nation-to-nation discussions concerning our ocean resources and how they will be managed. Number seven, mandatory use of electronic logs for all primary species fisheries. Number eight, declaration of our Canadian seafood as a critical North American resource. The protections that have been recently put in place for the critical Canadian minerals should be extended to our Canadian seafood. Alliances with global security partners should be created and formalized. Number nine, revise the current new entrant criteria so that the many men and women that seek a future in the fishery can gain valuable experience and enter the industry when they are ready. Number 10, allow more flexible partnership agreements so that expensive hard assets are utilized more efficiently. In addition, this process must be simplified from an administrative perspective to gain wider adoption. Number 11, reorganize the substitute operator policy to be more flexible to meet the needs of everyday life. We need appropriate allowances for time off without lessening the strength of owner-operator requirements. The oversight of a resource that is literally fluid in all aspects is not an easy one. Currently, we are seeing fractured relationships and resource exploitation by some that see the ocean as a source of short-term gain at the expense of the resource and the future. There are very encouraging signs that the next generation is keen on continuing the life of their ancestors. We collectively have a responsibility to get this right, and currently communication between government and all harvesters is lacking. We must come together with a goal of a clear, transparent, and articulate Fisheries Act. Our most current challenge is the current uncertainty that surrounds many aspects of the fishery. We require expanded dialogue amongst all parties that count on this valuable resource for our livelihoods. As legislators and decision makers, we all need to do our part in implementing practical solutions to complex challenges. Let's make the changes that will benefit all harvesters and communities. Thank you again for this opportunity, and Captain Jenkins and I would be glad to address any questions at the appropriate time in today's session. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question, and thank the witnesses for coming today. My question is to Mr. Bernatchez. Are there parts of the Fisheries Act that worked against your fleet in the recent allocations of Unit 1 redfish?
We could say, was it against our fleet? Was it to favor another fleet? I won't comment that, but definitely that we were hoping. I would say actually, the whole Federation of Canadian Fish Harvesters was hoping for a more balanced distribution of fish between offshore owners and inshore or midshore owners.
Do you think that the Act should address beneficial access to quotas on species that have had biomass growth at the expense of other species that have met their demise by overpredation? For example, with the redfish explosion and the destruction of the Gulf shrimp fishery. Do you think these type of predator-prey balances and those fishers that are affected by changes in balance, should that be somehow addressed in the Act?
Ben, si on souhaite,
Well, if we really want to employ a systemic approach and to take the fishers and the communities involved as being part of the ecosystem, yes, that's what we were asking for earlier. We were all working together to say that our scientists at the DFO had shown the impact of predation by sea bass on the shrimp, affecting the shrimp. They said that there were 200,000 tons of shrimp that had been eaten by sea bass, or by the redfish rather, and so we've been impacted by that. We would like to have seen to be able to fish quantities that would help us survive that.
My next question is to Mr. McPherson. Mr. McPherson, when fisheries close for conservation measures and then they reopen, who should gain beneficial access as a result of the conservation measures and the suffering that's been incurred by stakeholders? Say, for example, in the case of mackerel, should the mackerel fishery reopen in the near future, how would you like to see that access applied?
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Swall. I think what we need to do is refer to history in terms of who was fishing that resource before. The license holders, they're the ones that are impacted most by a closure of any fishery. I think to kind of just tie in with your question to Claudio, one of the things that I think needs to be looked at is what's the economic loss to a particular area, and maybe that should be a part of any decision. So if one species replaces another, so to speak, because of whatever reasons, that a case is made to keep the money, similar money coming into those communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. Many fishing industry stakeholders that I talk to are alarmed at the influence of ENGOs, the influence that they have at stock assessments. And many of these ENGOs who work against access to quotas are funded by organizations from south of the border, like Pew's. Can the Act address this? Who's a stakeholder and who's not a stakeholder in assessments? Do you think this should be addressed in the Act?
Is that to me, Mr. Small?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. It's my understanding, and we're very involved with that process in terms of the advisories and things like that. And we've been disappointed because DFO, in some cases, is not following their own guidelines to have people involved with some of those committees. But at the end of the day, it's we're very clear who we represent, and I think if people are going to be around the table, they need to there needs to be transparency in terms of who are they actually representing, and I mean that for a number of groups. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, what would be your number one ask if there were to be a change to the Fisheries Act right now? What would that act be, or what would that ask be, Mr. McPherson?
First and foremost, we want to protect owner-operator. As in our list, the resource has to win. So there has to be fulsome discussion with all stakeholders in terms of, if a fishery's in decline, how is that going to happen? And what are the impacts going to be? So I think those are some of the biggest things that we're facing right now.
Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll go to Madame Debienne now or less for 6 minutes, please. No, Mr. Morrissey. I'm sorry, I jumped over Mr. Morrissey. Sorry, Bob.
And that is a tall order, Mr. Chair.
I don't know. We'll see.
I'm referencing size. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are to Captain Jenkins and Mr. McPherson, and thank you for the very precise list of recommendations. I want to, and either one of you can comment as you choose on these in your answer. Reorganize the substitute operator rules. Could you add a little to it? And I want to go through a number to give you a chance to expand, so time is limited. What's your thinking here, Bobby?
On reorganizing the owner-operator? Well, thank you very much.
No, the
Bobby.
Substitute operator.
Substitute operator?
Yeah, because I do get a lot of.
Right now, we got 5 days. We got 5 days. That's what we got in Gulf. Fisheries has changed a lot since the 70s when that went in, that 5-day rule went in. I think we have to take a real comprehensive look at if somebody needs 30 days, he needs 30 days, whatever the case may be. It's got to be looked at by
so
case
different right
by case.
now. Yeah, right now you only have the option to use your 5 days or lose the whole season, which is impacting.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. My tuna fishery last year, my grandson was fishing with me. I was booked in the meetings. We had one fish left to catch. I had 1 day left on that 5 days. My grandson was fortunate enough to get that tuna that last day. Had he not got that tuna that last day, of my 5 days, I would have had to be in the boat every single day after that to catch the fish. I don't think that's an awful lot of the membership now are telling us, and we're hearing it at annual meetings all the time, is that 5-day rule has to be looked at. It's just not enough.
Okay.
Not enough time, Bob.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I'm hearing that as well. I'm going to go to your next one. You referenced modified new entrant policy. So again, you're the fisher here, the captain. You're on the wharf. What expand on this? What's your thinking here?
Well, right now we got. I don't have the criteria here right in front of me. It's in the Atlantic fishing regulations. It's not hard to get hold of. It's out there in the office, but I think the criteria is 3 or 4 things there right now. And what we've heard, and then we've heard it in particular from the west end of PEI, but we've heard it east too, and we've heard it all over the island, is some of this criteria has to be looked at. We don't want to we don't want to make it difficult for say somebody working out west, and he's coming home and he wants to get in.
Okay.
He may have a tax base in the oil patch out there, and he may be a renter and doesn't own property in PEI or New Brunswick or Gulf, any place in the Gulf, because this applies to all the Gulf. We're just saying relax. It's got to be looked at and relaxed a little bit more, Bobby. So the next generation coming up
because some people
easier access.
Right. Some people will go offshore to work to accumulate enough money to buy in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's tripping them up. I want you to, because on this one, there's a number of them here. Boots on the boats. How important is that?
Well, we believe. And
you can tie that in with the same seasons for all, because I think we're seeing some fisheries now that are starting to show catch declines because of different sets of enforcement rules. I'll be candid.
Okay, well, I guess I'll have to be candid back.
Good.
The boots on the boat came out of the moderate livelihood fishery for Indigenous people. And it came out of the maritime region down there. We adopted it here on PEI as other associations and various unions across the Gulf. We feel that that's the way it is for us under owner-op. Boots in the boat. I'm not allowed to hire somebody to run my fleet. I have to be present under that, unless I use that 5-day rule up that we just talked about. And we feel that that boots in the boat is very important to sustain an owner-op.
Could you focus in the time I have left? So I got less than 2 minutes on same season for all and the importance of consistent enforcement for all, for the future, the long-term future of this very successful fishery.
Well, we ran into the problem, as you guys, I don't have to tell you people, Saulnieville was a perfect example of what took place there. A few years back, people were trying to fish out of season. Fishermen down there didn't like it. They were very concerned over the sustainability of the stock. We are here in the Gulf as well. Our biggest fishery here, Bobby, as you know, is the lobster fishery, and we feel that in order to protect that resource to the best of our ability, and we've heard this countless times from all our members, is it has to be one season for everybody. You can't be fishing during the molt. You can't cut a bunch of people loose when everybody else is ashore. It'll be just a free for all, and it's not going to do the resource any good.
Chair, how's my time? I believe I'm just about up.
20 seconds.
Chair. Okay, the last part, and thanks for that. Could you comment on partnership changes? One of your recommendations, you referenced that. Maybe Ian or Bobby, whoever wants to take it in the time I've left.
Yeah, well, under the streamlining document that we did with Moncton, partnerships get brought up at our various meetings. And I'll give you an example of partnerships on PEI here now, or in the Gulf, on the Atlantic regs. Is if I was to partner, I partnered up a few years ago because my brother had cancer and he had to go for surgery, and he didn't know when he was going for surgery. Long story short, so we partnered up my fleet with his fleet. He lost 50% of his fleet. I maintained my fleet, my full trap limit, and I didn't realize at the time until I actually experienced it myself. That was quite a shortfall for somebody that was suffering from a like a disease like cancer. And I've heard from other people since that have done the partnership that 50% is too much. 25% would be adequate, but not 50.
Thank you.
So that's what that came out about.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less.
Pas de souci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all the witnesses for being present, and particularly Mr. Bernacci, whom I'm going to ask questions of for the next 6 minutes. Earlier, we had Dr. Morissette, who talked about horizontal mediation, that is to say, to put people together equally, independent scientists from all different disciplines, economic development, sociology, biodiversity, and so on. A study was done to that effect by the Quebec Maritime Network. And you've seen, as I did recently, that people want to speak with a single voice in Quebec and the Maritimes in order to improve and in fact, to save our fisheries. So I'd like to hear what you think about this kind of horizontal mediation and how you could improve that proposal or add to it. Several ways, probably. That concept is not something I'm necessarily familiar with, but I'm happy to hear what you're saying. We've had a researcher from Laval who does research on impacts, the psychosocial impacts on fishers and communities that they come from. So currently there's a great deal of interest from many people to wish to be able to contribute so that fisheries are more inclusive and more comprehensive. And it even affects the whole valorization of the resources. because this is going to be more and more important. We need more diversity, and if that's to be the case, we need stakeholders from all around, because oftentimes it's good to have people who aren't necessarily experts, but who cause us to think about things differently. And that's when it becomes extremely important to have people from different horizons. And that's how I see things. From that perspective, the fact of moving away from the basic policies that we often see unfolded here, I don't want to get into all the details, but bringing more transparency and lack of partisanship, to work more in cooperation with other stakeholders, with a deep wish to integrate what's happening on the grounds and the new components that other diversification of sea products of the sea could bring. So is moving away from the policies of it would be an asset? Well, I will say yes. Now, am I certain of that? No. However, what I am sure about is that if we continue to manage the fisheries in Canada as we have done for far too long, with interests that come from all sides, whether it comes from scientists who want to protect their departments, or whether it's fishers who want to have increased income, or processors who want more business as well, regardless of the stakeholders involved. But of all of these people, if they all focused on the resource, if we continue to do things as we used to, we are doomed to failure. I think there are several species that are declining or at risk. And yes, we can blame climate change when it suits us, but at the same time, when we propose solutions to decrease somewhat, perhaps, the impacts of climate change, very modestly, to be precise, at the same time, we're not listened to necessarily. So never before in the history of fisheries in Canada have we seen such a need to have all the people work together and to work more and more in collaboration in order to do so. I know someone in PEI who talks about the shared interests across the country that are addressed by the Federation, and we aren't listened to, or almost not at all, by the government. So do we need to have lobbyists to help us be better heard? Perhaps we should. But nevertheless, if we don't talk about all of the interests involved, whether they're management or personal, we'll never get out of this. It's very interesting what you're saying. It really causes us to think, Mr. Bernaches, because we are looking at the Fisheries Act reform, and we'll have to integrate some of the recommendations that you've made. Should we perhaps at that point in time establish some kind of body that could be outside of the department of DFO, that could have be in charge of these decisions? Well, I most humbly wrote about this in the text that I read earlier. There are people who are better placed than myself in each of the provinces in Canada who could really stop and think about the possibilities and to make sure that the most important decisions aren't made by a single person who doesn't necessarily have the expertise required to do so. So a group of wise people that could perhaps support DFO in taking these most important decisions, yes, I believe in that. I don't think these decisions should be in the hands of a single person. They're too important. Thank you very much.
Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the witnesses, Mr. McPherson, Captain Jenkins, and Mr. Bernatchez. Mr. McPherson, perhaps I'll direct my questions at either yourself or Captain Jenkins, whoever is best suited to respond. My first question, first of all, thank you for so clearly outlining the items that you see to be most important. That helps for us to be able to easily use this information in our recommendations moving forward. You'd spoken about mandatory use of logs, and I don't believe this was expanded on yet. Can you share a little bit, I know you've spoken to us before about the importance of e-logs. Can you share a little bit about any updates that you have on that and any movement that you see that is required for us to move forward on?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the question. The electronic logs have been discussed for quite a while. I think back to 2014. So it's been a few years and been delayed, but we are seeing some implementation, at least on the East Coast, snow crab and lobster in this spring of 2025. So the PIFA and the RPPSG and private company called Veracatch are, I think, going to be the three primary suppliers. The PIFA's in the last stages. But I think we all understand if we're going to protect the resource and make that paramount, that there needs to be as much real-time data collection as possible. This is for our international certifications, but also for a lot of other reasons. They're not going to be a silver bullet, but I think it's also really important that if we can collect data for science that and make that more timely, then hopefully the people that are in resource management have more tools at their fingertips to make cases for when a stock's declining, but also when a stock's rebounding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. Another thing that was brought up quite a bit by through the chair, Captain Jenkins had mentioned quite a bit the boots on the boat, and you were just talking about this. I find it so interesting how the same concepts are used with such ease when we talk about East Coast fisheries, but when we talk about them on the Pacific side, there seems to be a lot of justification to not move forward. Now, there's no denying that a transition is required to support the process moving forward. But I'm wondering if you could high level just reiterate how boots on the boat actually results in increased proceeds going towards those local fishers, towards local communities.
I think I don't want to oversimplify, but I think a lot of times those people live in the communities, their kids go to school, they contribute volunteerism, whatever, but it keeps I don't have the exact stats at our fingertips, but I do know that a lot of our members, reinvest back in their communities if they're there, and that benefit goes there, and it can benefit a number of communities. So whereas if it's a corporate entity, we could see either the proceeds going to other parts of Canada or out of country. So this is why we feel it's important that we're fishing locally, employing local people, and having those benefits go back to the local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. One item that I don't believe I heard you bring up is around any impacts that you're hearing from fishers around any changes to stocks, any migratory changes, any reduction in stocks, new stocks as a result of the climate crisis. Are there any points that you can share with us today that you are hearing from fishers around the firsthand implications, and any recommendations that you might have on how we can best move forward to address our quickly changing stocks?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of examples, but certainly one of the most striking local examples is the prevalence of striped bass. They're a predatory fish. They're very aggressive. They're starting to really decimate some of our stocks and our smaller fish. And there's been autopsies done on small juvenile lobsters too. So they're a vacuum cleaner out there, and we are working with DFO. There was a bit of a pilot project done, but I think this is a prime example on the east coast of Canada where we've got a fairly detrimental stock. Now, it is worth something to be caught and sold, which is the upside, but I think we need to adapt more quickly, or we're going to see the decimation of some key stocks on the East Coast here.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. Another question you'd mentioned around the importance of nation-to-nation work. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, for number, Bobby had mentioned Sonyaville, and I will be absolutely clear that our fishing organization does not want to see any sort of repeat of what happened down there 3 or 4 years ago. But there needs to be dialogue, and harvesters need to talk about the tough things too and the problems. And it's my understanding that the reason that harvester groups are not allowed at the table, and I'm talking about non-Indigenous harvesters, is the nation to nation. Well, that is my understanding is a policy. It's not a legal requirement, and I think this really goes a long way in creating issues in that when there's a vacuum and people don't know what's going on, then a lot of times human nature is you assume the worst. We need more in-depth and more transparent dialogue amongst harvesters, plain and simple.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here this morning. Well, I guess after lunch now, this afternoon. Mr. Morrison, or McPherson, I'll start with you. You've talked a lot about everyone under the same season and so on. We've read the articles about the issues with some of the fisheries on the Atlantic coast. Is there anything specific needed in the Act to deal with the organized crime element? Or is that under the criminal code or other statutes? Is there pieces that could be in the Act that would address the ever-increasing value of the commodity and the apparent attraction of organized crime?
Certainly, we've been the PIFA has been quite prominent in this part, Mr. Arnold, in terms of we do issue victim impact statements when we're asked in terms of the detrimental impacts. And one of the things that we haven't been making a recommendation of the courts on is to make the fines substantial enough so that it's not becoming just a cost to do business. And the other thing that we've been quite focused on is suspension of fishing days, particularly at the front end of the season, as a deterrent, because in a lot of fisheries, those are the most prolific and valuable days to our harvesters. So these are things that could maybe discourage that. But if the fines are such that it's just a cost of doing business, then that's a big problem.
Now, are these pieces legislation, or would they be regulation that is already enabled in the Act that haven't been implemented? Are there actually changes in the Act, or are the processes, or is the ability there within the legislation to implement regulation and adjust fines and penalties for that piece of it?
Well, certainly they need to be lockstep. I mean, you're the legislator, and I guess we're more exposed to the regulation side of things. But there again, when you have fulsome discussion amongst groups, I think industry can come up with some good recommendations. I think we want the same rules as we mentioned earlier for all harvesters. That keeps the playing field level and protects our resource. But obviously, if there's criminal elements involved, we need to have legislation that'll help plug those holes, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. Are the current regulations and laws being enforced to the extent that they need to be or should be in order to protect not only the resource but also the legal harvesters that are out there?
That's a broad spectrum question. I think we need to see consistent enforcement in all our fisheries, and in light of some of the things that are going on, I just wanted to quickly loop back to something you mentioned. 10, 12 years ago, a lot of these fisheries weren't very lucrative, and hardly anybody was interested in them. And absolutely, it's a problem in that the value of the fisheries have skyrocketed, and we've got a lot of people interested in participating or getting the proceeds of the fisheries that weren't really interested too many years ago.
Okay, thank you. I want to switch quickly to Mr. Jenkins. You talked about the 5-day rule and so on. Are there any changes that are needed to deal with, say, captains that have long-term health issues, whether it be cancer or dialysis requirements? Those long-term health effects and issues that would keep a captain or an owner-operator from being on the boat, and are there adjustments needed there?
Yes, I believe there is, especially in light of a lot of these fishing enterprises in the Gulf here are family-oriented. And I've been fishing for 50 years, so they'll give you an idea how old I am. But I still enjoy fishing, and I want to keep fishing. But if I was to go to my doctor, say next spring, and he tells me something's going on, it doesn't mean I'm going to be ready to get out of the fishery, Mr. Small, but I would like the opportunity to be able to grab one of my grandsons and say, here, it's going to be up to you now. You take the gear until I get a clean bill of health. And there shouldn't be all these loopholes. There shouldn't be especially for families. There may be, a case where you may have to look at this by case basis. But I mean, if you're looking at father-son, father-daughter, even nephews and nieces and things like that, I think that has to be taken into consideration when you're looking at this. A lot of these gears are family oriented, and they have to be looked at in that way to cover some of these obstacles, and that's what I'm calling them right now, is obstacles, because they're outdated. The gentleman.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Arnold.
thank you.
You're going way over. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Bernatchez.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bernatchez, my main questions are mainly for you. I was listening to what you said in terms of decisions, and I find some of your statements a bit curious, even if I agree with a lot of them. First of all, in terms of shrimp, like you, I agree that we probably waited too long before addressing the redfish issue, because there were great quantities of them in the Gulf, and there was certainly an impact on the shrimp and on other species too, probably. You were saying that we should make all decisions out and take it out of the hands of politicians and others. So, Mr. Bernatchez, since I've been an MP and was elected in 2015, and before that at a different level of politics, almost all decisions made by officials that didn't please the fisheries industry or others, all of the groups, including yours, would come to the government and ask MPs or even the minister and ask them to change those decisions. So now what are you going to do if ever you want to have none of these decisions made by politicians, and that these decisions shouldn't be taken by officials? So who's going to take those decisions? Well, first of all, I was talking about the most important decisions, first of all. And there could be exchanges on that, obviously. But what I'm trying to get people to understand is that there's a great deal of interest in the industry, and the interest comes from all stakeholders, including the fishermen. So it's an effort to see how, and I don't have the answer, Mr. Cormier, but how could we manage when important decisions are to be made for the future of the fisheries in Canada and the resource, that we should be able to have people who are neutral, non-partisan, without personal interests to help guide those decisions. So I know that officials are doing good work. I know several. But we also know that I'm told that our hands are tied. It's the minister that will decide. So But Mr. Bernatchez, the minister is advised by the officials at DFO, and so they certainly speak to other people. Even we as MPs can give her some advice when we think that things should be done differently, which I did in terms of the shrimp issue and also the management of the whale crisis that we did this spring, and we managed to get the rules changed because the officials at the department made errors because they used 3 different maps. Now, having said that, there are other people who should be involved, you say, in these decisions, fishermen, and I agree, we need to take into consideration their arguments. But other individuals like Ms. Morissette, Dr. Morissette on the other panel today, who are not part of DFO, and they're saying that the shrimp is gone. There's not the quantities that we had before. And some fishers are saying there is shrimp. There is lots of shrimp. So we should reopen the fisheries. Now, having said all that, Mr. Bernatchez, don't you think that rather than having such arguments, which often sow more division, than the Fisheries Act, because the Fisheries Act states that we must protect our resources, but we rarely talk about protecting our communities. So don't you think there's something in the Fisheries Act that should be included in that legislation? Perhaps it exists, but I don't recall. But if a fishery is closed down and we've said that a resource is no longer viable and has to be protected, that we also should act to compensate fishers, the industry, and the communities who depend on that fishery. Yes, that would be, we should look into that. Now, Mr. Cormier, but what I'm saying is that we should bring all the stakeholders to work together and in collaboration. And we obviously don't want to divide an industry that is already too divided at the outset. We're trying to bring people together and also to predict when there might be a crisis on the horizon. There are always interests, and I know that when you're saying that there's shrimp in the Gulf, we know very well that there's not much. We have to be careful. Well, that's exactly right. That's why I'm saying that earlier. We're doing things to help. I would have participated.
For 2.5 minutes or less, please.
On s'en reparle prochainement. Merci.
We'll talk again soon. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not often that we disagree, Mr. Cormier, but for the moment that is the case. I wish you could have come to our meeting. Nobody beat up on anybody else. People wanted to work together. You would have been very welcome. Now, having said that, I'm going to come back, Mr. Bernatchez, on testimony that we heard from Mr. David Vardy a few weeks ago. He's an economist. He's a very important person who's worked at high levels of government in Newfoundland and Labrador. And he said openly to us that the best way, and I think that what we're trying to establish here, Mr. Cormier, is how are we going to rebuild trust with fishers? And how are we going to bring back the fabric that holds these different authorities together? So what's happening on the front lines, you know as well as I do because you've lived it. Everybody's facing a crisis, and it's a major one. We heard about it earlier. Dr. Morissette was talking about the urgent nature of these problems. So I think we are at a point where we really need to review how the department works and makes decisions for scientists, for independent associations, fishers, everyone. And I think that if there's a guideline that flows from the meeting that we had, our symposium, it's that. I'd like to know if you have anything to add to that, if there's an important component on the fact that Mr. Hardy was saying that we need an open and public tribunal with more transparency, and that the success of countries like Norway and Sweden, it's because the decisions were made far away from the federal government. It gave them more flexibility and more cooperation between the various authorities. So what do you think of that? Well, regardless of the model that we decide on, we don't want to create an entity that is going to sow division, because unfortunately there's much too much suspicion within the industry between the fishermen themselves. It's difficult to find consensus on various points, and we can see that right now. We saw in the redfish announcements that we are being told that there'll be new announcements for the lobster fishery soon, but it creates a lot of discontent and suspicion because we haven't managed to ensure within the industry that we can look to the long term. We're often just within this fishing season at the time, and we're not taking the opportunity to participate in other meetings and see how we might do better for the future of the industry. Because at some point, Mr. Cormier, for your information, the Fisheries Act does talk about taking care of coastal communities, but we're focused mainly on doing everything we can to protect the resource. I know that nothing's perfect. None of us are perfect, but I think that with the current system and the way it works, it's demonstrated that since 2020 at least, and that's as far back as I'm aware of it, we could probably have done better. Yes, there's climate change, but that doesn't explain everything. So could we not find other ways, as we do within the independent fishers organizations in Canada, could we not try and solve this?
And I'll go to Ms. Barron to clue up this portion of our meeting today.
Thank you, Chair. I have a very important job cluing up all the time. Just a comment, because I ran out of time, Chair, in the last round, just around the last comment around the nation from Mr. McPherson. I think that it's important for me to just say quickly that I do agree that there's a lot of work that management at DFO has to do to ensure that there's clear communication between Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishers. But there's also, of course, the constitutionally protected First Nations treaty rights. And so I would definitely welcome a larger discussion with Mr. McPherson and make sure that we are in understanding around the best path forward prior to our recommendations being formed. So I just wanted to mention that. Mais je vais arrêter ici parce que je veux que...
I'm going to stop here because I want to give the rest of my time to Madame Desbiens. Oh, I have such a wonderful colleague to my left. Thank you very much, Ms. Barron. So I think I have a minute left. Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Benachez, I will allow you to continue what you were saying by giving you the opportunity to conclude. What can we integrate into the Fisheries Act in the short term to try and save a part of what unfortunately has happened? Well, if we're talking about coastal communities, we have to preserve the whole owner-operator concept as much as possible. I think that's at the base of everything here. On top of that, we have to realize that the changes we're experiencing now are happening at speeds that we've never seen before. So we need to be adaptable. We need to be flexible. All stakeholders must be. And I don't know how to tackle it, but at some point in time, people will have to try and trust each other and do better what's been done until now. And this is true for many files beyond the fisheries. So I ask all stakeholders to think about the long term, and at the end of the day, to think that if we haven't done what we possibly could to save the resource, well, it'll be our children, our grandchildren, and generations after us who will have to be eating farmed fish rather than a fresh fish that comes from our own waters as we did as we grew up. So there you go.
Our witnesses, Mr. McPherson, Mr. Bonace, and of course Mr. Jenkins, for sharing their knowledge with the committee today as we do this study. We're going to suspend now for a moment and go in camera to give instructions to the analysts for the drafting of the report on Northern Cod.
you.